Your attention, please. Good evening. Yes, order. If I could call this session to order, I'd like to welcome one and all to the Premier's panel that we're calling Moments in Time. It's to mark this 20th anniversary of this beautiful building that we call home. For me, it's a true pleasure. My name is Doug Schauerte. I'm the Deputy Clerk of the Legislative Assembly, and I've had the pleasure of working with these folks, these icons of territorial politics for many years, and I know where all the bodies are buried. And it's been a real pleasure and a real honor for me to serve as moderator for tonight's panel discussion. This is a family reunion of sorts. That's the way the feeling I'm getting. It's like a homecoming. I know the folks down at Pine Point did something akin to this earlier in the summer. And so it's a real pleasurable experience, and you can tell by the free and easy conversation how happy people are to see one another again and to get reacquainted and get caught up. So it's a really truly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and although time marches on and stops for no one, we're really looking forward to this exchange. And so I'd like to welcome back 9 of our 10 former premiers to the place of the people. Unfortunately, Don Morin is south on personal matters and is unable to join us tonight. And he's the only one, and we send out our regards to Don Morin. This building is aging very gracefully, as you can see, and I would, in my humble opinion, I think our former premiers are doing likewise. The theme of our 20th building anniversary celebrations is honoring our past and embracing our future. And along the lines of honoring our past, I would like to just very quickly take note of the presence of a couple of very important people in the political history and the history of this great territory. And in particular, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of, I'm not sure if he's with us right at the moment, but you would have seen him down in the Great Hall, but former Commissioner Stuart Hodgson is with us this weekend, and we're very happy for that. Mr. Hodgson was Commissioner of the Northwest Territories from March 2nd, 1967 through April 6th, 1979 for about a 12-year period. He was the first commissioner who resided in the Northwest Territories. And he was the commissioner at a very exciting time in our history. The capital had recently transferred from Ottawa to Yellowknife, and with it came a lot of authority that was growing authority that was also being transferred. He was appointed an officer of the Order of Canada in 1970, and was also a decorated Royal Canadian Navy veteran. He was affectionately nicknamed Umingmak by the Inuit people of the North, which is muskox in the Inuktitut language, because of his big presence. And he was also the last commissioner, I should note, to actually appoint members to the Territorial Council, as it was known back then. And he was also the last to actively participate in the political debates of the day. And he widely traveled the North, another thing he was known for. So a very warm welcome, as I see him coming in now, to Mr. Stuart Hodgson. If we could give him our applause. I would also like to acknowledge and warmly welcome former Commissioner John Parker, who was Commissioner of the Northwest Territories from April 1979 through July 1989, a 10-year period of time. He was also appointed as an Officer of the Order of Canada in 1986, and Mr. Parker made significant contributions to the evolution and development both of the municipal government here in Yellowknife, but also the territorial government, as we all know. He moved to Yellowknife in 1954, worked for a brief period as the manager at Ray Rock Mine, and then in 1964 helped to establish Precambrian mining services here in the north. He was elected to the town council in 1958 and elected mayor in 1964. And Mr. Parker was, of course, the last commissioner to act as the head of government, so to speak, in the capacity as commissioner. And I found a great quote that described Mr. Parker as the true steward of Canada's north. He's credited with helping to shed the last symbols of colonial power from Ottawa, and it was largely, I think, through his work even prior to his time as commissioner, through his membership on the Carruthers Commission, which was an advisory body that led to many important changes in NWT political development. So a very warm welcome to Commissioner Parker and his wife, Helen. Thank you. And of course, not to be forgotten, another former commissioner is a stranger to no one, Mr. Anthony W.J. Whitford, Tony, to one and all. Although we do it with tongue firmly in cheek, we often comment about Tony's varied experiences here under this dome as a former speaker, former minister, former sergeant-at-arms, and of course, former commissioner, a man of many talents, a man for all seasons. Welcome, Tony. Yeah. And very quickly, I'd also like to acknowledge in our presence in the gallery, former clerk of the Legislative Assembly, Mr. William Binks Remnant. Welcome, Binks. And I would be remiss if I did not also acknowledge the presence of former clerk David Hamilton, who was instrumental in the design and construction of this beautiful building. He's a mentor, a friend, a gentleman, and a scholar. And so a very warm welcome to David and his wife, Kate. Thanks for coming back. Okay. So without further ado, you're here to hear from our former premiers. And I made contact with these folks a few short days ago and posed some of the questions that we might like to put to them tonight. And so hopefully they've prepared. I see there's some of them have sheets and sheets of material, so we're limited to about an hour, but I know as former politicians, I'll have to kind of keep things in pretty tight check here. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'd like to perhaps, maybe we could go in chronological order. I would like to maybe put a question to George Braden. Now, Mr. Braden was, of course, the government leader from 1980 to 1984. This was the term that was used prior to the term Premier being adopted, in I think it was in 85, or sorry, in 95, when Ms. Coyne was our Premier. So, Mr. Braden, if you could, would you please, I guess, share with us what your most significant experiences or challenges were in your time as government leader, and perhaps what you're most proud of?
Well, one of the biggest challenges was, I believe it was at the session in Hay River, when, as the leader of the government, I had to stand up and inform all the public servants in Yellowknife that we're going to kick them out of their government-subsidized accommodation. It didn't make me very popular. And I made myself even further unpopular by saying, well, next on the list is, I think, Hay River and then Fort Smith. But it actually worked really well because we've ended up in fairly short order with a thriving public-private housing market here in the Northwest Territories. But there were a number of other challenges. The patriation of the Constitution happened a couple of years into our mandate, and I believe it was my friend and colleague Dennis Patterson who cooked up the idea to take the whole legislature down to Ottawa to lobby the federal government about Aboriginal rights and territorial provincehood. And believe me, if I wasn't for working with my colleague Nellie Cornway, it was a big challenge. But I think all of the MLAs at that time did just a superb job. I was very fortunate to be asked to be the commissioner of the Northwest Territories Pavilion after I left politics. I only served one term. And that was just an exciting time for me personally, because 1.5 million people went through our pavilion in Vancouver, and they were just amazed at the story of the North, which included Nunavut at that time, that we had to tell. So those are a few of the major accomplishments. There's some other stuff that I'll never ever forget, and after every session ended, we had what we called a pierogi party. It was a prorogation party. And we had our sessions in the Explorer Hotel in the cat rooms, and one of the cat rooms was set aside for our party, and there was the Explorer Hotel at this old upright piano, and it would be wheeled into the room, the session would end, and everybody would come in and have a refreshment, if I could use that term. But I'll never forget one particular pierogi party. Someone was playing the piano, and it was just before Christmas. And Mark Ludi and Ipoli and John Parker were singing Christmas carols simultaneously in Inuktitut in English. It's something I'll never forget. It was a classic moment. So those are just a few comments on the questions you have. Thanks, Doug.
Great. Thanks so much, George. Now, of course, the 1970s, the 70s were a great period of rapid change. Well, even though the 60s and 70s, there's been so much change. You know, although the building's only 20 years old, but it was in 1975 that we had our first fully elected legislative assembly. Prior to that, it was a mixture of appointed members, federal government, civil servants, and appointed members. But it wasn't until 1975. So in, 38 short years, or 38 short years, is that what it is? My math is weak. But there's been a rapid change. And so a lot has transpired. And I wonder if Mr. Richard Narasu, who served as the government leader from 1984 through 1985, if you wanted to share with us perhaps some, perhaps what are your views on consensus government, Richard?
What consensus? Well, I'll say it this way. I actually had a good conversation with my two colleagues, Dennis Patterson and George Braden, earlier today. And what I said to them, and I think with my colleagues here, Nellie, Dennis, Nick, and George, and those that were elected in 1979, I think, without any question, that was the beginning of the dynamic change politically in the Northwest Territories. And I say that my colleagues here, some of them were not in cabinet in the first term, change really the North. We never had, I always think about the conversations we had, the Special Committee on Education, the whole change of moving responsibility for education into our communities and establishing the authority and responsibility in the boards and the communities being engaged in it. I think about the housing changes, the House Special Committee on Housing, and how that whole issue changed so that we had a different view about home ownership in our communities. I think about the willingness of my colleagues, and I was a kid. I'm a kid now in the eyes of many here. But the reality is at that time I was very young. And I have to say thank you to my colleagues for giving me the opportunity to be a leader. I know it was challenging, but nonetheless, I thank them for changing the history of Canada by selecting the youngest government leader premier in the history of Canada at 30, the first Aboriginal First Nation leader in the country. We've done lots of firsts. You know, you see Nellie, first Aboriginal woman to lead a government. You see, you know, you think about the people that were here. You look at all the Aboriginal people that are here. Nowhere in Canada have you been able to see this. So we have lots to be proud of. I think about the constitutional conversation and that whole group of us, you know, all of us getting on that Electra and flying all the way from here to Ottawa and then flying back. Most people think that the conversations or the constitutional changes for Section 25 and 35 somehow came from a lot of other people, but this is a group of people that led that conversation and in fact assured Canadians that the interests of First Nations and Aboriginal people, Métis, Inuit, were going to be protected.
Hear, hear.
The other thing that happened for me, is this issue of protecting the interests and the rights of Canadians in the Charter. That was not an issue that was going to get into the Constitution. The Prime Minister had a very difficult time, but this group of people that were in that assembly were there to defend that concept of having the Charter of Rights in the Constitution. So when I think about all of those things, you know, many people, as one would say, were not necessarily dynamic leaders in many respects, but we knew what we needed to get done. I think about the Health and Social Services Special Committee and all the changes that happened, the health boards, the engagement of citizens in delivering health services to our people. This is the group of people that did it. And so I think about those kinds of things from 1979. The most important thing that I thought about us, though, is that on these big, major issues, this group of people, especially Nellie, Dennis, Nick, George, were prepared to go direct to the people in special committees and ask the people in our communities, in our regions, what was their interest, what did they want in the big decisions that had to be made. Not afraid of them. We were members elected, but we were never afraid to go to our people. That's what I remember about some of the people that are here and what happened. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. And now I'd perhaps like to call upon one of our, well, we don't have any time limits officially. However, I see Mr. Sibbeston, Senator Sibbeston comes prepared. Senator Nick Sibbeston was our premier from 1985 through 1987. I know he's happy to be here. He's happy for the relief from his other duties in Ottawa currently. And I'd like to perhaps maybe ask Senator Sibbeston to share with us some of his reflections on his time in office.
Well, thank you. I made a few notes because I thought it was fairly important because things have changed so much from the time that I started in politics. I came on the political scene in 1970, and the Territorial Council then consisted of 14, 10 elected and 4 appointed. And that was the scenery that I came into. And the democracy as we know it was in its infancy. The idea that elected people could speak and eventually be part of government. That notion was in its infancy, but it grew from there. The government had just arrived in the north. Stu Hodgson flew from Ottawa with a big plane with some staff, with some files, with Bink's remnant, and they established government in the north. And for 10 years, Stu worked hard to establish government in Yellowknife here and in the regions and the communities. And I think that's his legacy, and I give him that. He sometimes, at the time, when we're elected people, he was sometimes seen as a bit of an enemy. And during the first 4 years that I was in Territorial Council, he was the government. Stu Hodgson was the government, the deputy commissioner, the assistant commissioner, they were the executive and they were the government. And we were often told in Territorial Council that you are just advisors. And then a number of times, at least once, Stu walked out of the assembly with a mace and shut down debate and assembly. And that was the nature of government in that time. So I think people need to know that because we've come such a long way in democracy. And I remember those days, the elected voices did not count very much, but the prominent people were Lyle Trimble, Tom Butters, David Searle, and these were the big guns. And over the last few years, I've had a chance to reread some of the debates, and I'm so impressed, and I give credit to Lyle Trimble, Tom Butters, and David Searle for really speaking on behalf of things that need to be said, basic things like houses, education, and so forth. And I'll just say that eventually, when I went away for a period of time, and I came back in 1979, and by 1979, there were great advancements. There was no more appointed members, the assembly was fully elected, and the executive then consisted of still John Parker, Bob Pilot, and then George Braden, Richard, James Washee, and Arnie McCollum, and Tom Butters. So things had changed considerably in the advancements towards responsible government. And my interest when I came on the scene in '79 was to change government and our legislative assembly. My biggest fear was that we were going to have Ontario and Alberta type legislatures in the north here. I didn't want to go that, so I spent a lot of time, you may have heard, some of the things that I was involved in changing, making sure that Aboriginal languages were used in the assembly, dress, decor, and things of that sort that I really pressed in those days. And I know there were other things like geographic names, and I'm still amused that the museum is still called Prince of Wales. And now we spent days and days debating about changing that to a northern name. And there were a lot of issues. Anyway, after being a critic of government for 4 years, I eventually decided to become government. And being part of government is really different. There's something beautiful and free about a freewheeling MLA. You can say what you want, and you can challenge government because you don't have to do it. You know? And so when I think back, I think my best times, my best years were being MLA. And I found the transition to being minister very difficult because suddenly, now you got to toe the government line. You are the government. My staff used to remind me, he says, Nick, you are the government, and you can't be critical anymore, and and like I said, when I became minister and government leader, I'm reminded of George Washington, I think once saying when he became president, he made an order and nothing happened. And that's the way government is. It's very hard to change things, particularly moving the civil service. So it was very difficult. And then, lo and behold, I eventually became government leader. And I'm not going to say and sit here, those were the best years of my life. They were the most difficult years of my life because it's very